Millionaire pays his maid to have his child, but when the baby was born, he was shocked and everything changed. Before we begin the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Jacob Miller lived surrounded by luxury in his massive mansion, yet deep inside, he felt an emptiness that no fortune could fill. That morning, Jacob found himself troubled by a thought that had been haunting him for a long time. What will happen to all of this when I'm gone? He had no heir. As these thoughts consumed him, the sound of footsteps echoed from the main hall. He glanced out of his office window and saw Lucy Evans. The 25-year-old was carefully cleaning the crystal chandeliers. Lucy had been his maid for a few months, someone he rarely noticed. But in that moment, something about her caught his attention. Her determined posture, her focus on the task, it was a simplicity that contrasted sharply with the excessive world he inhabited. Jacob watched her longer than he should have, and an idea formed in his mind. Lucy could be the solution to the problem he was trying to solve. She was young, healthy, and above all, didn't seem interested in impressing him. He could propose an arrangement, something straightforward and uncomplicated. She would have his child in exchange for a large sum of money. Afterward, she would move on with her life and leave the child with him. As Jacob mentally crafted his plan, Lucy continued her work, unaware that she was being watched. For her, working at the mansion was her only option. The salary barely covered the rent of the tiny apartment she shared with her sick mother. Nearly all of her earnings went toward the medications that kept her mother alive. But it wasn't enough. Her mother's health was worsening by the day, and the doctors had been clear. She urgently needed surgery or wouldn't survive. Lucy was doing everything she could to save money, but the amount needed was far beyond what she could ever dream of. Even so, she refused to give up. Her mother was all she had, and Lucy knew she would do anything to save her. At the end of the day, as Lucy packed up her cleaning supplies, Jacob appeared in the hall. He rarely spoke directly to the staff, but this time his firm voice broke the silence. "Lucy, come to my office. I need to speak with you." She froze, a chill running through her. Something in his tone told her it was serious. She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron before following him. As she stepped into the office, Lucy felt dwarfed by the grandeur of the space. The shelves lined with books and the massive dark wood desk made the room feel even more intimidating. Jacob sat behind the desk, his posture rigid and his expression unreadable. "Sit down," he said, motioning to a chair in front of him. Lucy obeyed, folding her hands in her lap as she waited for him to speak. "I'll get straight to the point," he began bluntly. "I want you to have my child." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Lucy blinked, confused, thinking she must have misunderstood. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice weaker than she intended. "I want you to have my child," Jacob repeated as though discussing a straightforward business deal. "I don't want to get involved with anyone. I've tried, and it doesn't work. But I need an heir, someone to carry on what I've built. And I think you're the ideal person for it." Lucy's jaw dropped. This couldn't be happening. How could he suggest something so absurd? "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why me?" Jacob shrugged, as if the answer were obvious. "Because you're discreet, trustworthy, and have no emotional ties to me. I want something simple. In return, you'll receive a substantial amount of money, enough to change your life." Lucy's heart raced at those words. Money. She desperately needed money. But this was insane, right? How could she even consider something like this? "And what would happen afterward?" she asked, trying to remain calm. "After the baby is born, they'll stay with me. You'll receive the money and be free to move on with your life. I don't want complications." Lucy stared at him, incredulous. Part of her wanted to scream, to tell him how inhumane this was. But another part, the part thinking about her mother's surgery, the overdue rent, and the dwindling supply of medications, knew she couldn't dismiss the idea so quickly. "I don't know. This is too much," she stammered, feeling lost. Jacob observed her silently for a few seconds before saying, "Think about it, Lucy. I'm offering you a unique opportunity to change your life." She didn't reply. His words echoed in her mind, but she couldn't process them. With nothing more to say, Jacob concluded, "You don't need to decide now. I'll give you a few days. But keep in mind, this offer won't be on the table for long." Lucy left the office feeling dazed. As she walked to her room, her mind was in turmoil. The proposal was insane. But what if it was her only chance to save her mother? Lucy spent the entire night tossing and turning, unable to close her eyes. Jacob's words echoed in her mind. I want you to have my child. The idea was absurd, completely surreal, but the weight of reality made it hard to dismiss. Her mother was getting weaker by the day, and the salary she earned at the mansion barely covered rent and medication. The surgery was a matter of life or death, and Lucy knew she didn't have time to waste. As the sun finally rose on the horizon, Lucy was already up. Sitting at the small desk in her room, she stared at an old photo of her mother. In the picture, they were both smiling, happy, carefree. That seemed so far away now. Lucy felt a lump in her throat and closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears. All she wanted was to give her mother a chance to live. But at what cost? Part of her said that accepting would be a huge sacrifice but necessary. The other part screamed that it was wrong, that she would be selling something priceless. Suddenly, her phone rang. It was a call from the clinic where her mother was receiving treatment. Miss Evans, the receptionist began, we're calling to remind you that the deadline for the surgery is approaching. Without it, unfortunately, we can't guarantee your mother's recovery. A date has been reserved, but we'll need confirmation and payment. Lucy thanked her and hung up. The tightness in her chest grew even stronger. Time was running out, and she didn't even have half the money needed. She knew that without the surgery, her mother wouldn't survive. When Lucy returned to the mansion, she found Jacob in his office. He was standing by the window, but he turned as soon as he heard her footsteps. Lucy hesitated at the door, feeling the weight of what she was about to say. Come in, Lucy, he said, motioning to the chair in front of his desk. Have you made a decision? She took a deep breath before responding. Not yet, but I need to understand better what you're proposing. Jacob nodded, as though he had expected this. He sat in his chair, resting his arms on the desk. It's simple. There will be no physical involvement between us. Everything will be done through artificial insemination. During the pregnancy, you'll have full support, housing, medical care, and proper nutrition. After the birth, you'll receive a sum that will allow you to start a new life. In exchange, the child will be mine. You will have no responsibilities or rights over them. The words came out coldly, as if he were closing another business deal. Lucy looked at him, trying to understand the man in front of her. He seemed so confident, so convinced that he was offering something fair. But for her, it was anything but simple. Can I think about it a bit more? She asked, rising slowly. Jacob nodded. Of course, but don't take too long. The next day, Lucy woke up with a decision. Despite everything, she knew she had no other choice. She couldn't live with herself if she lost her mother, knowing there had been a solution, no matter how absurd. After finishing her morning tasks, she went to Jacob's office. He was reviewing documents when she entered. As soon as he saw her, he put down his pen and clasped his hands on the desk, waiting for her to speak. I accept, Lucy said bluntly. Jacob raised his eyebrows, surprised by the firmness in her voice. He didn't ask for reasons or expect her to explain. To him, everything was a matter of logic and mutual benefits. Excellent, he said, retrieving a prepared contract. Read this carefully. I want to make sure everything is clear to you before we sign. Lucy took the document with trembling hands. As she read it, she noticed that every detail was outlined. The support she would receive, the amount of money to be paid after the birth, and the clauses ensuring she would have no claim over the child. It was all so clinical, so calculated. When she finished reading, she looked at Jacob. He handed her a pen, and after a brief hesitation, she signed. It was official. Her life was about to change forever. A heavy silence filled Jacob Miller's office after Lucy signed the contract. The pen was still in her hand, but her mind felt distant, weighed down by the enormity of what she had just agreed to. Jacob, seated in his chair, calmly collected the document with the demeanor of someone who had just closed another lucrative deal. His expression was impassive, but for a fleeting moment, his eyes seemed to assess her with curiosity. It's done, he said, placing the contract into a folder. From now on, all arrangements will be made to start the process. Lucy remained silent, her heart racing. Although she had made the decision consciously, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a line of no return. She needed the money, and fast. Her mother depended on the surgery, and the rent was overdue once again. But none of that eased the internal conflict consuming her. Jacob stood up, adjusting his tie. He seemed ready to move on with the next step of his unshakable routine, but turned to Lucy before she could leave. I want you to know that everything will be handled to ensure your comfort. Whatever you need will be made available. Lucy nodded in response, but his words seemed to float in the air, unable to pierce through the chaos in her mind. As she left the office, she felt the weight of the choices she had made, but also the urgency driving her forward. For her, there was no alternative. That night, in the small room she occupied at the mansion, Lucy stared at the ceiling. The decision should have brought relief, but all she felt was a knot in her stomach. She picked up her phone, hesitating before calling her mother. "Hello, sweetheart." Her mother's weak voice came through the line, bringing a mix of comfort and pain. "Hi, Mom. I just wanted to see how you're feeling today," Lucy replied, trying to sound calm. "A little tired, but I'm okay." "And you, sweetheart, you're not working too hard, are you?" Her mother's concern was genuine, but Lucy felt the weight of the lie she had to maintain. "I'm fine, Mom. Everything is under control." After hanging up, Lucy let the tears flow. She couldn't tell the truth, but hearing her mother's voice gave her strength. Everything she was doing was for her mother, even if the cost was too high. Jacob, on the other hand, seemed unaware of Lucy's emotional turmoil. He spent the evening reviewing the contract once more, ensuring there were no loopholes or ambiguities. It was an almost obsessive habit, but that wasn't what bothered him. Lucy's expression as she signed the contract kept replaying in his mind. There was something about that moment he couldn't quite identify, a mixture of determination and pain that unsettled him. The next morning, Jacob made all the arrangements to start the artificial insemination process immediately. He hired the best specialists to ensure every step was handled with precision. When he informed Lucy of the first appointment, he insisted on accompanying her. She tried to protest. "I don't think it's necessary. I can go alone," she said, trying to avoid more contact than necessary. "I want to make sure everything is done properly," Jacob replied, ending the discussion. During the car ride to the clinic, silence filled the air. Lucy stared out the window, trying to ignore Jacob's presence beside her. He, on the other hand, seemed perfectly comfortable with the quiet, as if it were just another business meeting. At the clinic, the doctor explained every detail of the procedure. Lucy listened carefully, asking occasional questions, while Jacob remained silent but attentive. He only spoke once, ensuring that all the steps would be meticulously documented. The initial procedure was successfully carried out, and Lucy received the news a few weeks later. The insemination had worked. The confirmation brought a mix of relief and fear. It was real now. A life was growing inside her, and in the end, she would have to let it go. The thought was almost unbearable. During the first few months, Lucy tried to maintain a normal routine, but the pregnancy brought inevitable changes. Her relationship with Jacob remained formal, but something began to shift. He started asking more about how she was feeling and began showing up frequently for her medical appointments. Lucy noticed these gestures but chose not to assign much meaning to them. One day, while resting in the garden, Jacob appeared without warning. He stood next to her, observing her for a moment before breaking the silence. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his tone lighter than usual. Lucy looked at him, surprised by the question. She hadn't expected him to show concern. "I'm fine, thank you. Just tired, I guess," she replied, trying to hide the emotional exhaustion that consumed her. Jacob nodded, appearing thoughtful. "If you need anything, just let me know. I don't want anything to compromise your health or the baby's." She didn't know how to react. Jacob's usual coldness seemed to be giving way to something more human, but Lucy refused to let her guard down. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she asked, her tone slightly provocative. "It doesn't seem like something you'd normally worry about." Jacob stared at her for a moment, as if carefully considering his response. "Because this will change everything," he finally said. "For me and for you." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. For the first time, Jacob seemed more vulnerable, less calculating. Lucy looked away, not wanting to acknowledge his humanity. It was easier to think of him as a cold man, focused solely on his own interests. Lucy's days followed an outwardly calm routine, but internally she carried a storm. Her pregnancy was progressing, and the physical changes were becoming more noticeable. With every movement of the baby, Lucy felt a mix of joy and sadness. Joy for the new life growing inside her, and sadness knowing she would have to give it up in the end. Jacob was more present than she had expected. While he remained cold in many ways, his actions revealed a concern Lucy never thought he was capable of. He insisted on accompanying her to medical appointments, asked the doctors questions, and ensured she had everything she needed. Still, Lucy kept her emotional guard up. She didn't want to believe that Jacob genuinely cared. One particularly hot morning, Lucy decided to help Stephanie organize the library. Feeling bored, she thought staying active would help pass the time. She spent hours climbing up and down the small ladder, arranging books, cleaning shelves, and dusting. When she finally finished, a sudden wave of dizziness overwhelmed her. "Are you okay?" Stephanie asked, rushing over when she saw Lucy sit on the floor, clutching her belly. "I just need to catch my breath," Lucy replied, trying to sound calm, but the pain spreading through her abdomen made her wince. Stephanie didn't hesitate. She grabbed the phone and called Jacob, who was in his office. Within minutes, he walked into the library with determined steps and a worried expression. "What happened?" he demanded, his tone sharp. "I just overdid it a little," Lucy said, trying to downplay the situation, but the pain on her face was undeniable. Jacob stared at her for a moment, his expression tense. "Stephanie, get the car. We're taking her to the doctor now," he ordered. At the clinic, the doctor examined Lucy thoroughly, running several tests. Jacob sat beside her, arms crossed, his expression serious. When the doctor returned with the results, his tone was firm. "Lucy, your pregnancy requires more care. Stress and intense physical activity can cause complications. You need to rest more and avoid any unnecessary strain. Rest is essential to ensure the pregnancy progresses smoothly." Lucy nodded, embarrassed. She felt guilty for not being more careful, but she had just been trying to keep her mind occupied. Jacob, however, wasn't about to let the issue slide. "You heard the doctor, Lucy. Rest. This isn't a suggestion, it's a necessity," he said, his voice authoritative as he helped her to her feet. On the drive back to the mansion, the silence in the car was heavy. Lucy avoided looking at Jacob, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. When they arrived, he helped her out of the car and walked her to her room. "Why do you insist on ignoring your limits?" he began, arms crossed. "Don't you realize this isn't just about you? There's another life at stake." Lucy took a deep breath, trying to hold back tears. "I know, Jacob. I know that better than anyone. I just don't want to feel useless." He was quiet for a moment, as if processing what she had just said. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't about being useful or not, Lucy. If you want to do something, do what's best for the baby. And that means resting." Despite the firm tone, there was a hint of genuine concern in his voice. Lucy simply nodded, too tired to argue. "Let's play a little game with those who only read the comments. Type milkshake in the comments. Only those who make it this far will understand." Now let's continue the story. In the days that followed, Jacob seemed determined to ensure Lucy followed the doctor's orders. He hired a nurse to monitor her and reorganize the household schedule so Stephanie could take over all the tasks Lucy insisted on helping with. Initially reluctant, Lucy eventually realized that Jacob was trying to make her feel comfortable, even if he was strict about certain decisions. "You don't need to watch over me all the time," Lucy complained one afternoon while sitting in the living room, sipping tea. Jacob, who was reviewing documents in the same room, looked up at her. "It's not watching, it's precaution," he replied, his eyes returning to the papers. Lucy sighed, but deep down knew he was right. Sitting idle made her feel powerless, but she knew she had to prioritize the baby. One day, Jacob arrived with a large package and placed it next to Lucy. "What's this?" she asked, curious. "Something to keep you busy, without having to leave your chair," he replied, pulling out coloring books and colored pencils. "It might seem childish, but I've heard it's relaxing." Lucy laughed, surprised by the gesture. "You actually bought coloring books for me?" "I don't see the harm in trying something new," he said with a faint smile. "I might even join you." She looked at him for a moment, trying to figure out if he was joking or serious. It was hard to imagine Jacob Miller, the most rigid man she had ever met, sitting down to color. Still, the gesture was enough to warm her heart. As the weeks passed, Lucy began to adapt to her new routine. She spent more time reading, listening to music, and, surprisingly, coloring. Jacob occasionally showed up to keep her company, always with some practical excuse. "I just want to make sure you're following the doctor's orders," he would say as he pulled up a chair next to her. Lucy noticed that behind his formal demeanor, Jacob was changing. He was still practical and goal-driven, but there was a softness in his actions that hadn't been there before. He started asking about how she was feeling. Not just physically, but emotionally too. One evening, while Lucy was sitting on the porch enjoying the breeze, Jacob appeared with 2 mugs of tea. "I brought this for you," he said, handing her one of the mugs. Lucy thanked him, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. It's nice to know I'm being taken care of." Jacob sat down next to her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. They just listened to the sound of the wind and the trees. Finally, he broke the silence. "Lucy, I know this isn't easy for you, and I know I can be a bit too intense at times, but I want you to know I'm trying my best." She looked at him, surprised by his confession. "I know, Jacob. And despite everything, I appreciate it." At that moment, both of them felt that something had changed. They were no longer just two people bound by a contract. A bond was starting to form, something neither of them was ready to admit but couldn't deny. That afternoon, as Lucy tried to distract herself with a book, her phone rang. It was her neighbor, who was taking care of her mother, calling to inform her that her mother had fallen ill again. Lucy's heart raced. She quickly hung up and sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling. The weight of responsibility and fear overwhelmed her, and before she knew it, she was gasping for air, struggling to breathe. Jacob, who was in his office reviewing contracts, heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. Stephanie knocked on his door urgently. "Mr. Miller, it's Lucy. Something seems wrong. She's unwell in her room." Jacob immediately got up, crossing the hallways quickly to Lucy's room. When he entered, he found her sitting on the floor with her hands on her head, breathing heavily. "Lucy, what's happening?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She tried to respond, but the words came out broken. "I can't breathe." Jacob grabbed a glass of water from the bedside table and held it in front of her. "Drink this. Breathe slowly, Lucy. I'm here," he said, his tone firm yet concerned. Gradually, Lucy managed to calm down. Her hands were still trembling, but her breathing began to stabilize. Jacob helped her up and guided her to sit on the bed. "Are you feeling better?" he asked, looking at her seriously. Lucy nodded, but her tearful eyes revealed she was far from okay. "It was just a panic attack," she murmured, trying to look away. Jacob, however, wasn't convinced. "It wasn't just that." "What happened?" he pressed. Lucy hesitated. Telling the truth about her mother meant exposing her vulnerability, and she wasn't ready for that. But the genuine concern in Jacob's eyes disarmed her. "My mother, she's getting worse. The surgery needs to happen soon, but I'm stuck here, and..." Her voice cracked, "and I feel like there's nothing I can do to help her." Jacob was silent for a moment, processing what she had said. It was the first time she had mentioned her mother. He realized, for the first time, how much Lucy had been carrying on her own. "Lucy, why didn't you tell me this before?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "Because it doesn't make a difference," she replied bitterly. "I agreed to this arrangement to save my mother. I know the money will help, but until then, I can't do anything but wait." Jacob felt a pang of guilt. He had always seen their arrangement as a practical transaction, but now he understood that for Lucy, it was something much deeper. She was sacrificing more than he had ever imagined. "You're not alone, Lucy," he finally said. "I know it feels like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, but I'm here. If you need anything at all, just tell me." Lucy looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Despite his usual coldness, in that moment, Jacob seemed almost human. That same night, while Lucy slept, Jacob picked up the phone and made a quick call. He asked his team to investigate Lucy's mother's situation and resolve the issue immediately. The next day, he went to the hospital himself, signing papers and covering the costs of the surgery and future treatments. A few days later, Lucy's phone rang again. It was the hospital. "Miss Lucy, we're calling to let you know that your mother's surgery has been fully paid for. We can schedule the procedure in the coming days." Lucy was stunned, almost dropping the phone. "What do you mean? Who paid for it?" she asked, her heart racing. "We can't disclose that information, but all expenses have been covered," the attendant replied. Lucy hung up and sat on her bed, trying to process the news. The only person who could have done this was Jacob. Determined to confront him, she went downstairs to his office. "Jacob, I need to talk to you," she said, walking in without knocking. He looked up from his laptop, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Is something wrong?" "It was you, wasn't it?" "You paid for my mother's surgery," she stated, crossing her arms. Jacob sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It wasn't exactly a secret that you needed help. Why? Why did you do this?" He stood up, walking toward her. "Consider it an advance on our agreement, Lucy. Now just accept it and don't argue," he said firmly, but without arrogance. Lucy shook her head, torn between gratitude and pride. "I don't know how to thank you, Jacob, but this..." This is more than I ever expected." "Then don't thank me. Just focus on taking care of her," he replied. Lucy remained silent for a few seconds, overwhelmed by her emotions. "All right, I accept," she finally said. But deep down, she felt a heaviness in her heart. Even though she knew her mother would be safe, something deeper was stirring inside her. Lucy went back to her room, reflecting on the situation. For the first time, she saw Jacob as more than the cold, calculated man he showed to the world. Perhaps, behind the facade of a rigid millionaire, there was someone capable of genuinely caring. The relief of knowing her mother would have the surgery brought tears to Lucy's eyes. She was happy, but she couldn't shake the weight of everything that was happening. She gazed out the window, lost in thought as the moon lit up the dark sky. Jacob, meanwhile, returned to his work, but his mind was no longer fully focused on the numbers. He knew he was getting more involved than he should, but strangely, he didn't regret it. In the following days, Jacob began showing more care toward Lucy. He made a point of asking how she was and offered to help her with small things. Though his gestures were subtle, Lucy started to notice a change in his demeanor. One evening, as she sat in the living room with a warm cup of tea, Jacob walked in with a package in his hands. "I got something for you," he said, handing her the package. Lucy opened it to find a soft, colorful blanket. "It's for the colder nights," he explained, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Thank you, Jacob. It's beautiful," Lucy said, smiling. He nodded, seeming relieved that she liked it. He sat down in a nearby armchair, watching as she draped the blanket over her legs. "You always try to handle everything on your own, don't you?" he asked, breaking the silence. Lucy looked up, surprised by the question. "I guess I do. I've never really had a choice," she replied, shrugging. "It's always been just me and my mom. There was no one else to help." Jacob was thoughtful for a moment. "That explains a lot," he said, more to himself than to her. Lucy frowned. "What do you mean? You're different from the people I know. They always have ulterior motives, but you just want to take care of your mother. It's rare to find someone like that," he said sincerely. Lucy was speechless. It was the first time Jacob had said something so personal to her. As her pregnancy progressed, Lucy's moments of vulnerability became more frequent. One day, while she was sitting in the garden trying to relax, Jacob appeared with 2 chairs and a tray of juice. "I thought you might enjoy some company," he said, setting the tray on the small table between the chairs. Lucy smiled, grateful. They sat side by side in silence for a while, enjoying the gentle breeze. "Have you always been this controlled?" Lucy suddenly asked, breaking the silence. Jacob looked at her, surprised by the question. "Controlled? Maybe. I've always thought it was the only way to keep things running smoothly." "And does it work?" she pressed, curious. He was silent for a moment, staring at the horizon. "Most of the time, yes, but not always," he admitted. Lucy could tell he was being honest, and it made her feel closer to him. It was as though, little by little, they were breaking down the walls between them. The connection between them continued to grow in subtle ways. Jacob started making more time to be around Lucy, even if he wouldn't admit it to himself. He knew something was changing within him, but he wasn't sure how to handle it. For Lucy, Jacob's presence was comforting, but it also left her feeling conflicted. She sensed they were growing closer, but she didn't want to allow herself to form bonds that might eventually break. Both of them understood that the contract that had brought them together was just the beginning of something neither of them had anticipated, but they were far from understanding where it would lead. The atmosphere in the mansion felt different. Since the night Jacob had comforted Lucy, their interactions had subtly shifted. He seemed more present, more attentive, and Lucy was beginning to let her guard down. The contract that had initially tied them together now felt like a mere detail in the midst of something greater, though neither of them was willing to admit it. That evening, while Lucy was resting in the living room, Jacob appeared with an unexpected invitation. "Lucy, tomorrow night, I'd like you to have dinner with me. Something more formal." She looked up from the book she was reading, surprised. "A formal dinner?" she asked, intrigued. "Why?" Jacob hesitated before answering, as if searching for the right words. "Consider it a gesture of gratitude for what you're doing. You're going through all of this for something greater than yourself. I think it's the least I can do." Lucy tried to hide the blush rising to her cheeks. It wasn't something she had expected to hear from Jacob, the cold and calculated man who treated her as a part of their arrangement. Nonetheless, she nodded in agreement. "All right, A formal dinner, then. The following evening, Lucy descended the stairs in a simple yet elegant dress that Stephanie had helped her choose. She was nervous, which didn't make sense to her. After all, it was just dinner. But something about the way Jacob looked at her as he waited in the dining room made her even more uneasy. Jacob was impeccable in a black suit, something usual for him, but the way his eyes softened when he saw her made her feel something unfamiliar. He pulled out a chair for her, a gesture she hadn't expected. "You look beautiful," he said casually but sincerely. "Thank you," Lucy replied, taking her seat. "You look formal." Jacob gave a faint smile before sitting down. The meal began in silence. The sound of silverware was the only noise in the expansive dining room. Feeling uncomfortable, Lucy decided to break the silence. "So, do you often have dinners like this?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Jacob glanced up, amused by the question. "No, not really. It's rare for me to have company during meals. Usually, it's just business meetings. I think I've forgotten what it's like to have a real conversation at dinner." Lucy chuckled softly. "Well, at least now I know I'm not just another business transaction." Jacob tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. "You were never just a business transaction, Lucy. I think it took me a while to realize that." His words caught her off guard. She looked away, trying to process what he had said. There was a sincerity in his tone that disarmed her. As the meal went on, their conversation became more natural. Feeling more at ease, Lucy began talking about her childhood. She shared stories about the challenges of growing up in a modest home and how her mother had always done everything she could to ensure Lucy had a better life, even at the expense of her own well-being. "My mother has always been my inspiration," Lucy said with a bittersweet smile. "She sacrificed so much for me. I think that's why I'm doing all of this now. I want to make sure she has the chance to live without pain, without fear." Jacob listened intently, something rare for him. For the first time, he seemed genuinely interested in someone else. "Your mother must be an incredible woman," he said after a moment. "And so are you. Not many people would do what you're doing." Lucy felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment, but quickly changed the subject. "What about you?" she asked. "What was your childhood like?" Jacob hesitated, as if reluctant to talk about himself. But after a moment, he decided to share a little. "My childhood was complicated. My father was a very demanding man. Everything revolved around expectations. He wanted me to be perfect, to follow in his footsteps. And well, I think I became exactly what he wanted." "But did that make you happy?" Lucy asked, curious. Jacob let out a short laugh. "Happiness wasn't the goal. Success was. But after he was gone, I realized that none of it meant anything if you didn't have someone to share it with." His words carried a melancholy that Lucy hadn't expected. In that moment, she saw that Jacob wasn't just the cold, calculating man he appeared to be. He carried deep scars, too. As the conversation flowed, Jacob began to talk about his past relationships. He mentioned the heartbreaks he had endured and how they led him to distrust any emotional connection. "People don't care about who you are, Lucy. They care about what you can give them. And when they realize there's nothing more to take, they just leave." Lucy felt the weight of his words, and for a moment she understood the reason behind his coldness. He had built that wall as a form of protection, but it was clear that it had also isolated him. "Not everyone is like that, Jacob," she said softly. "Some people care about who you are, not what you have." Jacob looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to determine if she really believed what she was saying. "Maybe you're right," he finally said. "But it's hard to trust again when you've been betrayed so many times." Lucy didn't respond, but her expression said more than words could. She knew what it was like to trust someone and be let down. Though their experiences were different, she felt a connection with Jacob in that moment. When dinner ended, Jacob walked her to the living room. They sat on the couch, the silence between them now comfortable. Lucy looked at him, sensing that something had shifted. "Thank you for dinner, Jacob. It was different," she said with a small smile. "Different can be good sometimes," he replied, looking at her with a softer expression. For a moment, Jacob's eyes locked onto hers, and Lucy felt warmth rising in her cheeks. She looked away, trying to hide what she was feeling, but deep down, they both knew something was happening. A bond was forming, even if neither of them was ready to admit it. The morning was sunny as Jacob parked his car in front of the ultrasound clinic. Lucy, sitting beside him, watched the activity outside with a mix of anxiety and curiosity. This was the first appointment where they would clearly see the baby, and Jacob had insisted on coming with her. "Ready?" he asked, turning off the engine and looking at Lucy. She nodded, trying to calm her nerves. Although it was an important moment, there was something unsettling about sharing it with Jacob. His growing presence and attentiveness left her feeling conflicted. The two entered the clinic, where the doctor greeted them. After a few instructions, Lucy was taken to the exam room, with Jacob staying by her side. He maintained his serious demeanor, but his attention never wavered. When the ultrasound began, the sound of the baby's heartbeat filled the room. It was a strong, rhythmic sound that seemed to echo in every corner. Jacob, who was used to controlling every situation, sat completely still. For the first time in a long time, he felt something he couldn't describe. "This is the baby's heartbeat," the doctor explained, pointing to the screen. "Everything looks healthy and on track." Jacob's eyes remained fixed on the grainy image on the screen. This wasn't just an abstract plan or a distant idea. It was a life, his child, growing right there. He couldn't look away. Lucy, meanwhile, watched Jacob's reactions more than the screen. She saw how captivated he was, almost lost in the moment. It moved her in a way she hadn't expected. Feeling the baby grow inside her had already been transformative, but seeing Jacob react like that made it all the more real. When the exam was over, Jacob finally looked at Lucy. His eyes held an emotion he couldn't conceal. "This is incredible," he said quietly. "It's real." Lucy smiled, sharing the sentiment, but deep down she felt a pang of fear. She knew that with each passing day they were growing closer, not just to the baby, but to each other. And that made the thought of moving on after the baby's birth even harder. Back in the car, the silence was heavy. Jacob, who usually knew exactly what to say, seemed lost in thought. Lucy stared out the window, trying to ignore the emotional turmoil within her. "Thank you for letting me come with you," he said, finally breaking the silence. "It was important for me too," Lucy replied, still looking out the window. "I think it's good to share moments like these." Jacob hesitated before speaking again. "I never thought something like this would affect me so much. I always saw it as a transaction. But today, hearing the heartbeat, I realized it's so much more than that." Lucy turned to him, surprised by the sincerity of his words. Jacob rarely expressed his feelings so openly. "Yes," she said with a faint smile. "No matter how much we try to stay detached, this will always be bigger than us." They looked at each other for a moment, and Lucy could see that Jacob was changing. He was no longer just the cold, calculating man she had first met. Something inside him seemed to be awakening, and it unsettled her. In the weeks that followed, Jacob became more involved in the details of the pregnancy. He insisted on accompanying Lucy to every appointment, even if it meant rearranging his busy schedule. He also began asking about things that had once seemed trivial. If she was comfortable, if she needed anything specific, or if she had eaten properly. One day, Lucy was in the kitchen preparing a salad when Jacob walked in, crossing his arms as he watched her. "You should be resting," he said, a hint of reproach in his voice. Lucy laughed, calmly slicing tomatoes. "Jacob, I'm just making a salad. I think I can handle this." He stepped closer, taking the knife from her hand. "Let me do it. If the doctor said you need to rest, then rest." Lucy sighed but gave in. She sat on a nearby chair, watching as Jacob awkwardly sliced the tomatoes. "Who would have thought the great Jacob Miller knows how to chop tomatoes?" she teased with a playful smile. "Don't spread the word," he replied with a smirk. "I have a reputation to maintain." They both laughed, and the light-hearted moment eased the tension that usually lingered between them. Lucy realized that, little by little, Jacob was allowing himself to be more human, more approachable. And it made her like him even more, though she didn't want to admit it. One night, as Lucy lay in bed reading, Jacob appeared at her door. He hesitated before stepping in, holding a small package in his hands. "I brought something for you," he said, placing the package on the bedside table. Lucy opened it to find a small, empty photo album. "I thought you might want to keep some memories of this journey," he explained, looking a bit uncomfortable. Lucy felt her eyes fill with tears. It was a simple gesture, but it carried so much meaning. She smiled at him, deeply moved. "Thank you, Jacob. It's perfect." He nodded, standing in silence for a moment before leaving the room. Lucy stared at the album, feeling even more connected to him. The thought of saying goodbye after the baby was born seemed increasingly unbearable. For Jacob, the ultrasound had been a turning point. He could no longer ignore the emotions that were beginning to surface. The baby was no longer just a distant idea, it was real, and he felt he needed to be more than just a financial provider. He needed to be a father. Lucy, on the other hand, was conflicted. She knew she was growing attached not only to the baby, but also to Jacob. He was revealing himself to be a different man, someone she hadn't expected to find beneath his cold exterior. But the contract still loomed between them, a constant reminder that all of this had an expiration date. In the days that followed, the tension between Lucy and Jacob grew steadily, fueled by intense moments and the barriers they both insisted on maintaining. Yet neither seemed willing to admit what was happening. The contract hung over them as a constant reminder that everything they were building had a timeline. One quiet afternoon, Lucy sat in the garden, flipping through the photo album Jacob had given her. She had already begun filling it with small memories, medical notes, details about the baby, even a dried flower she had picked during a walk. The album had become a reflection of her emotions, a way to feel like she was creating something meaningful. Jacob appeared on the terrace, watching her from a distance for a moment before approaching. He carried some papers in his hands, and his serious expression made it clear he had come with a purpose. "Lucy, we need to talk," he said without preamble. She closed the album slowly, already anticipating that Jacob's formal tone wasn't a good sign. "About what?" she asked, her tone defensive. Jacob sat down beside her, placing the papers on the table. "It's about the contract. I want to make sure all the details are respected after the baby is born." "It was important for me too," Lucy replied, still looking out the window. "I think it's good to share these moments." Jacob hesitated before continuing. "I never thought something like this would affect me so much. I always saw it as a transaction. But today, hearing the heartbeat, I realized it's so much more than that." Lucy turned to face him, the coldness of his words hitting her like a bucket of ice water. Even though she knew it was inevitable, hearing Jacob speak so detachedly made her feel disposable. "Right," she said, trying to keep her composure. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Jacob hesitated again, meeting her gaze. "I just want to make sure you're prepared to leave when the time comes. I know this will be difficult, but it's important that we follow what was agreed upon." Lucy closed her eyes for a moment, trying to suppress the emotions stirring inside her, but she couldn't hold it in for long. "Prepared?" she repeated, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Do you really think it's that simple? That I can just leave like none of this ever happened?" Jacob frowned, clearly taken aback by her reaction. "Lucy, I didn't mean—" "No, Jacob," she interrupted, standing up. "For you, this is just a business deal, isn't it? Something to secure your precious heir. But for me, this is my life, my body, my health, and my feelings." Jacob stood as well, visibly uncomfortable. "That's not fair, Lucy. I never said it was just a transaction. But that's how you treat it," she countered, her voice breaking. "You never see me as anything more than part of your plan. You never think about what I'm going through, what this means to me." Her words cut deep, though Jacob tried not to show it. He knew he had been insensitive, but wasn't prepared to handle the intensity of Lucy's emotions. "I know this is hard for you," he said, trying to remain calm. "But it's not easy for me either. Do you think I don't feel anything? That this isn't affecting me?" Lucy stared at him, her eyes filled with hurt. "Sometimes, I think you're incapable of feeling anything, Jacob." Her words struck him harder than he expected. He took a deep breath, searching for a way to respond without making things worse. "I'm not perfect, Lucy," he said quietly, "and I never claimed to be. But I'm trying." Lucy crossed her arms, her heart still racing. "Then try harder, Jacob, because so far all you've done is remind me that I'm temporary, disposable." Jacob stepped closer to her, his expression shifting from defensive to remorseful. "You're not disposable," he said sincerely, "and if I've made you feel that way, I'm sorry. Truly." Lucy looked away, fighting back tears. His words sounded genuine, but the pain she felt wouldn't fade so easily. "Sometimes I wish this contract had never existed," she murmured, "because the longer this goes on, the harder it gets." Jacob stood in silence, absorbing her words. For the first time, he understood the emotional toll this arrangement was taking on Lucy, and he began to admit to himself that the connection between them was far deeper than he had anticipated. "Lucy," he began hesitantly, "I don't know how to undo what I've done, but I want to try. I want to do this in a way that doesn't hurt you anymore." She finally looked at him, seeing something different in his eyes. It wasn't the usual coldness, but something softer, more human. "Then start by being honest, Jacob," she said firmly. Because if we keep pretending this doesn't matter, it's going to destroy us. Jacob nodded, realizing he could no longer run from what he felt. He didn't know exactly how to move forward, but he knew he had to try. Let's play a little game for those who only read the comments. Type hot dog in the comments. Only those who make it this far will understand. Now let's continue the story. The argument had ended, but the tension between them lingered. Lucy retreated to her room while Jacob stayed in the garden, reflecting on everything that had happened. He felt like he was losing control, but for the first time it didn't seem like a bad thing. In her room, Lucy stared at the album she'd been filling, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. She knew she was becoming attached, not just to the baby, but to Jacob as well. And that scared her. Outside, Jacob gazed at the sky, searching for clarity amid the chaos in his thoughts. He knew he needed to change, not because of the contract, but because of Lucy. For the first time, he cared about someone in a way he couldn't ignore. The day started quietly at the mansion, but Lucy felt something different. There was a strange pressure in her abdomen, a growing sense of discomfort. She tried to brush it off and go about her usual activities, but as the hours passed, the pain intensified. In the library, Jacob was reviewing documents when Stephanie, the housekeeper, rushed in. "Mr. Miller, something's wrong with Miss Lucy," announced Stephanie, her voice filled with concern. Jacob immediately dropped the papers he was holding and rushed to Lucy's room. When he entered, he found her sitting on the edge of the bed, struggling to breathe. Sweat dripped down her forehead, and her hands were trembling. "Lucy, what's happening?" he asked, kneeling beside her. I think it's time," she said between short breaths. "It hurts, Jacob." He felt a knot tighten in his stomach at the sight of her so vulnerable. Without wasting a second, he helped her stand and guided her to the car. On the way to the hospital, Jacob gripped the steering wheel tightly, his usual calm demeanor completely shattered. He could think of nothing except ensuring Lucy and the baby were safe. "It's going to be okay," he said, more to himself than to Lucy. She looked at him, seeing the worry etched on his face. For the first time, Jacob seemed as human as anyone else. When they arrived at the hospital, a team of doctors and nurses immediately attended to them. Lucy was taken to the delivery room, while Jacob, usually in control of every situation, felt utterly powerless. He tried to maintain his composure, but fear gripped every fiber of his being. In the waiting area, he paced back and forth, casting anxious glances at the door. Every minute felt like an eternity. He had never cared about anything he couldn't control, but now he found himself completely vulnerable. A nurse entered, calling his name. "Mr. Miller, Miss Lucy has asked for you to join her in the delivery room." Jacob froze for a moment, surprised by the request, but he didn't hesitate to follow. When he entered, he found Lucy lying on the bed, pale but determined. Their eyes met, and he felt a wave of emotions he couldn't explain. "You came," she said with a weak smile. "Of course I did," he replied, stepping closer and taking her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." The labor was intense. Lucy gripped Jacob's hand tightly with each contraction, while he did his best to comfort her. "You're doing great," he said, his voice softer than ever. "I'm here, Lucy. I'm with you." She could barely respond, focused on her breathing and the monumental effort she was making. Jacob, on the other hand, felt utterly helpless. He would have given anything to take away her pain, but all he could do was stay by her side. Finally, the sound of the baby's first cries filled the room. Jacob froze, his eyes fixed on the tiny life that had just entered the world. It was a boy, perfect and healthy. The nurses cleaned him and placed him in Lucy's arms as she cried silently. "He's beautiful," she whispered, looking at the baby's flushed face. Jacob stepped closer, leaning in to get a better look. The weight of the moment hit him like a wave. This wasn't just an heir, not just a project. This was his child, and he had never felt anything so powerful. Jacob began, but his voice faltered. "He's incredible." Lucy looked at him, seeing an expression she had never seen before. Jacob's eyes were filled with tears, and he made no effort to hide them. "Do you want to hold him?" she asked, offering the baby to him. Jacob hesitated for a moment before gently taking the baby in his arms. He looked down at the boy, marveling at the fragility and perfection of the tiny life. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "It's me, your dad." Lucy watched the scene, her heart torn between joy and pain. She knew this moment was precious, but she also knew that soon she would have to let go of the baby. The contract loomed over them like a shadow, a constant reminder of the inevitable. After a few hours, Lucy was moved to a recovery room. Jacob stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand as though afraid she might disappear. "Thank you, Lucy," he said, finally breaking the silence. "For everything. I'll never be able to repay what you've done for me." She looked at him, exhausted but with a genuine smile. "I didn't do this for you, Jacob. I did it for the baby and for my mother. But I'm glad he has you. He deserves to be loved." Jacob felt a lump in his throat. Her words were sincere but carried a sadness he couldn't ignore. He knew Lucy was saying goodbye, not just to the baby, but to something much bigger. While Lucy slept, Jacob held the baby in his arms, studying him as if trying to memorize every detail. He thought about all the decisions that had led to this moment and realized his life would never be the same. The cold facade he had built over the years was crumbling. He was no longer just a businessman or an arrogant millionaire. He was a father, and that changed everything. Jacob knew he needed to make a decision, one that could change the course of the contract, which now seemed so insignificant. He glanced at Lucy, peacefully asleep, and at the baby in his arms. "I'm not going to let it end like this," he whispered to himself. He knew the next step would be the hardest of his life, but for the first time, he was willing to fight for something that truly mattered. The next morning brought an unusual stillness to Jacob's mansion. In the hospital room, Lucy sat on the bed, holding the baby in her arms, while Jacob watched from a chair nearby. The boy slept peacefully, unaware of the whirlwind of emotions his parents were facing. For Lucy, it was a bittersweet moment. She knew she would soon have to say goodbye, but every second with her son felt infinitely precious. Jacob, on the other hand, was conflicted. For years, he had prided himself on being rational, calculated, always following his plans. But now, watching Lucy with the baby, he realized there was something much greater at stake. He hesitated, trying to find the right words for what he needed to say. "You seem deep in thought," Lucy remarked, breaking the silence. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair before replying. "I am," he admitted. "There's a lot I need to reconsider." Lucy looked up, surprised by his candor. Until now, Jacob had been resolute about sticking to the contract. But there was something different about his expression. "Jacob," she began hesitantly, "I know this situation isn't easy for either of us, but please don't make it harder. When the time comes, just let me go. Don't prolong the inevitable." Her words cut Jacob like a knife. A sudden anger surged within him, not at Lucy, but at himself. At the man who had signed such a cold, unfeeling contract without considering the emotional toll it would take. "Do you think I want it to end like this?" he snapped, standing up. "Do you think this was just a plan to me?" Lucy stared at him, startled by the intensity of his reaction. "Jacob, I don't know what to think. You've always been so distant, so practical." He ran his hands over his face as if trying to calm himself. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Maybe I was at first, but that's not true anymore. I can't ignore what I feel now." Lucy averted her gaze, unable to look at him. "What do you feel?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob moved closer, kneeling beside the bed so they were at eye level. "I feel like I've done everything wrong," he admitted. "Like I treated you as part of a deal when you deserved so much more. Like I've tried to protect my heart for so long. But you've broken through all my defenses." Lucy felt tears welling up but tried to hold them back. "Jacob, that doesn't change the fact that we have a contract," she said with difficulty. "A contract I agreed to because I had no other choice." He shook his head and pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Not anymore," he said, handing it to her. "This is the contract, or what's left of it." Lucy opened the envelope with trembling hands, finding the torn papers inside. She looked at Jacob in disbelief. "You tore up the contract? Why?" He took her hand, looking into her eyes with a sincerity she had never seen before. "Because I don't want you to leave, Lucy. Not you, not the baby. I want you to stay, not out of obligation, but because us is what matters to me now." Lucy felt the tears finally fall. As much as she wanted to believe his words, the fear of being hurt held her back. "Jacob, you don't understand. It's not that simple." She paused, swallowing hard. "I don't know if I can trust you, not after everything." He nodded, accepting her hesitation as fair. "I know it's not simple, and I don't expect you to trust me right away," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm willing to fight for this. For you, for our son, for us." Lucy's heart raced. She looked at the baby in her arms and then at Jacob. There was something in his eyes that made her believe he was telling the truth. "Are you really willing to change?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want. And it's you, Lucy, you and our son." The silence that followed was heavy, but filled with hope. Lucy looked at Jacob, searching for the right words to respond. Deep down, she knew she felt something for him too. Something that had quietly grown over the months. But admitting it was terrifying. "I'll try," she finally said. "But I need time, Jacob. I need to know this isn't just a fleeting impulse." He nodded, visibly relieved by her response. "I'll give you all the time you need. Just don't ask me to give up on you," he said with a small smile. In the weeks that followed, Jacob did everything he could to show Lucy he was serious. He adjusted his schedule to spend more time with her and the baby, setting aside commitments that once seemed non-negotiable. He supported her in every decision, showed patience, and most importantly, demonstrated genuine care. Lucy, in turn, began to let her guard down, little by little. Although she still feared being hurt, Jacob's gestures gave her hope that perhaps they could build something together. In the same garden where so many tense conversations had taken place, Jacob held the baby in his arms while Lucy watched him. The sky was clear, and the sun enveloped them in comforting warmth. "I think we're finally on the right path," Jacob said, looking from the baby to Lucy. She smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in a long time. "Maybe we are," she replied, reaching out to take his hand. Jacob looked at her, and in that moment, they both knew they were ready to face the future together. Not as part of a contract, but as a family. Months had passed since the baby's birth, and Jacob's mansion was now filled with life. Lucy, more at ease, spent her days caring for the baby and organizing small family moments with Jacob. He, in turn, had become a completely different man. Once a cold and calculating millionaire, he was now a devoted father and a man willing to do anything for those he loved. One of Lucy's greatest joys was her mother's successful surgery months earlier. After years of worry and struggle, seeing her mother healthy and full of energy was an indescribable relief. Lucy's mother, Donna Rosa, frequently visited the mansion, enchanted by her grandson and thrilled to witness the transformation in both her daughter and son-in-law. One quiet evening, Jacob planned something special. He insisted that Lucy dress up for a dinner in the garden. She found the request unusual, but went along with it. When she stepped outside, she found the garden beautifully decorated, with soft lights and rose petals scattered on the ground. A table, elegantly set, stood beneath an arch of flowers illuminated by the moonlight. "What is all this, Jacob?" Lucy asked, surprised, as he led her to the table. "Just a night to celebrate everything we've built together," he replied with a calm smile. "You deserve it." The dinner was filled with laughter and shared memories. Jacob was more relaxed than she had ever seen him, and Lucy felt more connected to him with every passing moment. When the meal ended, Jacob stood up and walked toward her. His eyes held a mix of nervousness and determination. "Lucy," he began, taking her hands and slowly kneeling before her. "I never imagined I'd meet someone like you. When you came into my life, I thought this would just be a cold transaction. But you brought warmth, love, and purpose. You've changed me in ways I never thought possible." Lucy felt tears well up in her eyes, her breath catching with emotion. "I love you, Lucy, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a delicate diamond ring. "Will you do me the honor of being my wife?" Lucy covered her mouth with her hands, unable to hold back the smile and tears that blended together. For a moment, everything felt surreal, but deep down, she knew her answer. "Yes, Jacob. I will," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Jacob slid the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a tight embrace before kissing her with all the love he felt. The baby, sitting nearby in a stroller, let out a noise as if celebrating, which made them both laugh. A few months later, Jacob and Lucy married in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden. Only close friends, loyal staff members, and Lucy's mother attended. Lucy looked stunning in a simple yet elegant white dress that accentuated her natural beauty. Jacob, in a sharp black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her. Donna Rosa sat in the front row, tears of joy in her eyes. Seeing her daughter happy and healthy, standing beside a man who clearly loved her, was everything she had ever dreamed of. It was hard to believe that just months ago, she had undergone a risky surgery and now had the chance to witness this special moment in Lucy's life. As Lucy walked down the aisle with the baby in her arms, Jacob felt a wave of emotion so overwhelming he could barely hold back his tears. When they exchanged their vows, every word seemed to seal the bond they had built with so much effort and love. "I promise to stand by your side through every moment, Lucy," Jacob said, holding her hands. "You are my home, my heart, and the greatest gift life has ever given me." Lucy, her eyes glistening, responded, "Jacob, you gave me hope when I thought all was lost. I promise to love and support you in everything because you are my safe harbor." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the guests erupted into warm applause as Jacob pulled Lucy into a kiss filled with passion and tenderness. Donna Rosa, emotional, held her grandson in her arms and smiled at the couple. "You are my greatest joy," she said, her voice filled with gratitude and love. Months after the wedding, the family's life was full of love and small joys. One day, Lucy began feeling nauseous and at Jacob's insistent urging decided to see the doctor. At the appointment, she received news that changed everything once again. "Congratulations, Mrs. Miller," the doctor said with a smile. "You're pregnant again, and this time it's twin girls." Lucy was in shock for a few moments before a wave of happiness washed over her. When she shared the news with Jacob, he froze briefly, processing the information. "Twins?" he finally asked with an incredulous smile. "Yes," Lucy replied, laughing. "Are you ready for this?" Jacob laughed, pulling her into an embrace. "If it's with you, I'm ready for anything." The following months were filled with preparations for the arrival of the twins. Jacob and Lucy turned the mansion into a true home, full of laughter and precious moments. When the girls were born, Jacob cried as he held them in his arms, feeling more complete than he had ever imagined. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Jacob watched Lucy playing with their children. Their son, now almost 2 years old, giggled while the twin girls slept peacefully in a nearby crib. Jacob felt a warmth in his chest, something he had never experienced before. "Thank you, Lucy," he said, approaching her and hugging her from behind. "For what?" she asked, turning to look at him. "For teaching me what love is," he replied, kissing her forehead. Lucy smiled, holding his hand. "And thank you for giving me a family, Jacob." They stood there, surrounded by their children and the love they had built together. For Jacob, who was once a cold and lonely man, and for Lucy, who had faced so many struggles, that moment represented a new beginning, a life filled with love, hope, and happiness. And what about you? What did you think of Jacob's actions toward Lucy? Share your opinion in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What's your score? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our stories. And make sure to check out more emotional stories by clicking here on the end screen.